that provisions of that in scope maybe, but then like you mentioned, there are judgments available. I think that's one area where you don't have a uniform position to take. I think we'll have to rely on, like what Shreyas said, other laws in the country to kind of fill those spaces and take it forward, or existing precedents, because unless in a situation where you find an exact identical match and the courts agree, and I think one of the attendees made a valid point that you're applying that to the extent which is applicable in the Indian context, right? So one of those, for the facts of that particular matter, should fit better in the Indian context. If it doesn't, then the only way to resolve that is like what Shreyas mentioned. But I don't think there is a ready-made answer.
Sudeep, can I ask you? No, you're speaking against the proposition.
No, so I'm going to.
So you're not going to ask the. So Sudeep, now I'm going to. It's ridiculous. This guy flips from one side to the other. Sudeep, how do we deal with a situation where, even though we want to apply international precedent, there is a divergence in precedent? Is it useful then?
Well, this is the tricky area, and then I must say that this is very, very well brought out, that it's all very well to say that let's follow it all when it's uniform, but what when there is such a clear conflict as in this area? And I think that's where I would go back to the point that I just made, that ultimately it's a question of balancing conflicting rights. It's basically freedom of speech versus privacy. In the United States, freedom of speech is probably the holiest of holy grails, and except for national security, everything else must give way to the freedom of speech. So that's the balancing that has been done by that society. Europe values privacy far more than, say, the freedom of speech. But what would be instructive in when we follow those judicial precedents or look at those is to see how each court has balanced these conflicting interests. And it is that balancing exercise, I think, which is most instructive for us and which could lay the foundation for us to be able to argue at another forum at, say, where we are dreaming of international legislation and case law. So in that international legislation, by having the benefit of seeing how the different jurisdictions balance the rights, that we could probably argue for one sort of balancing against another.
And just to round up the panel, now I'm going to ask a question to both the people who are actually against the proposition. And that question has to do with the the nature of technology in these sunshine sectors. Mm-hmm. And that is, there is a requirement for standardization. There is a requirement for all these technologies to work with each other. Mm-hmm. So you've got ITU setting the standards globally for telecom. Spectrum is decided around the world. It is not what we decide to be spectrum, it is what ITU says is spectrum. You similarly have the W3C committee, which actually decides on how the internet is going to work. You have ICANN that does this, right? So there is already by virtue of the nature of the internet and these technologies, a requirement for standardization. In that context, should we not also be looking, when we are operating within this sector, to arrive at a standardization of judgments as well, given the fact that the base on which all these technologies work, by its nature and definition, is standard?
Okay, so I'm going to conflate that with your privacy example as well, right?
Fine,
so, and I'll take it from where we practice, right? So we advise companies typically on a bunch of issues, and privacy is one of those things. Especially as we look at young companies that are building business models around the free flow of data. Now, in an ideal world, we would know, say, a company that's building its model business on the fact that it can take the consumer data or the data of the people that visit a website and manipulate it to generate economic value. The provider of the information gets a free service. Let's take Gmail as being a great example. So all of us, pretty much everybody uses some sort of webmail account, and that's paid for by the fact that they can use some of the information to generate other revenues, right? And Google made it clear, saying that we're going to use automated technologies that automatically review your email to generate insights that we can use to populate ads on the side of the page. Now, if you're in that sort of a space and you're advising a company that's young, the need for uniformity is great, right? Because if I'm a company that's saying I'm going to sell to consumers in the US and in Europe and in Japan and Australia, we've got differing privacy legislations that really sort of thing. And so ideally we would like to tell them and understand that these are not just abstract concepts. Privacy, when you're building a business model, actually means everything, right? If your business model is predicated on the ability to manipulate data freely and you just can't do it in a couple of geographies, you may just not make any money. Similarly, privacy is an engineering concept. You have to engineer your application in a particular way. So therefore, when you're advising clients like this, we say, if you're planning to use make it available equally in the EU and the US, and you do not have the resources of an HP to provide different instances, you will engineer it for the most
Lowest common denominator.
no, for the most stringent denominator, because that way, see, the US doesn't complain if you use the EU data protection standard. It just says you don't need to do it. Okay, so in that sort of sense, absolutely there is a case for uniformity. There is a case, and if you could build, if we could use precedents to build advice for our clients, that'd be awesome. But I don't think that that's going to happen because people, and then it goes back to my thing about socioeconomic context. Each society views things differently, and countries aren't willing to give it up just yet. Yes, technology's moved one way, people have moved but people are sort of convenient creatures, right? So today when I like the technology, I consume it, not a problem. Tomorrow when I don't like it, I'm going to look to my national system of law and say, hey, no, I didn't agree to this stuff, I didn't agree to you profiling me, because suddenly I've just got a bad credit score and I can't get a credit card. So that's the problem, and I don't think we're going to really solve it. We may ameliorate it by sort of using precedents until such time as people some trans-global sort of system works itself out.
So is there any chance that we're going to get the New York Convention for the Internet and Sunshine sector?
Absolutely not. Even the New York Convention, they've tried to amend it for years, and they've not failed to do so. I want to say one final thing. I know that I will be brief. I would vote for creative chaos and trusting individual creativity of lawyers and judges in whichever jurisdiction they're practicing, rather than bet on a uniformity, which is unreal. It's an unreal this technology by definition is disruptive. Get used to it. You're not going to get uniformity. I've heard the word uniformity from every one of the speakers. It's not going to happen. It will never happen, because the moment you've identified something, that itself is a weakness for change. And so I'm sure that we've got to get used to the new reality where there is going to be plurality. There is business models will have to get used to it. And yes, it is convenient for businesses to have uniformity, but they'll have to learn to compete in a world without it. And a mature business will understand and be able to develop that strategy. So I don't think it is a business prerequisite, even for global business, to have uniform judgments on technology. And I end with saying I deal with litigation and disputes not only in India but even elsewhere. And I'm currently dealing with an issue in southern United States, and it deals with the issue of partnership law. And partnership law is something that is so divergent from one jurisdiction to another. What does it take for two parties to be considered partners in a particular situation? If law can be divergent and we're all living with it quite happily in every other sector of partnership, of company law, of everything else, why not learn to live creatively with this divergence in the technology sector?
A quick one on Shreyas. If you see the Internet of Things and the way the mature companies which you put across, they're talking around standards, and it is standards across the IoT. So there is some sense that we need to live with not just, we need to get to the uniformity in some sense, because then you're having a gadget interface, which is Internet of Things. You have the whole platform, which is doing Internet of Things. Your fridge will now be deciding what you'll be doing, and that's what you get.
Yes, but is that a happy world? And is that something that we're going to see do? If they're going to be, and there will be, it is not going to be this very, what you're saying is advocating one side of a convergent business model. There'll be equally other technologies which will come up with a different way of dealing with these.
And Shahad, I'll give you a simple example of that. So when Steve Jobs decided that he wasn't going to embed Flash or Flash capabilities, he said HTML5, take it or leave it, right? So the whole world ran on, all animation on the internet ran on Flash till Steve Jobs said, I don't care what the standard is. I'm going to change it.
So, to be truly transparent about this, HTML5 is the open standard and Flash is the closed proprietary standard.
Well, I mean,
So
but-
what Steve Jobs did was actually, move the world in the correct direction.
Well, look, so I'm not disputing that. All I'm saying is this argument of standardization and open APIs versus non-open. Yeah, well, I mean, and people like HP have worked for decades to keep things closed and proprietary. That's not a dig at you. I'm just saying that that's a business model. That's a business model which is now, so open APIs versus closed proprietary systems that require expensive programming to talk to each other. These are things that will continue, and I think that's what Shreyas's point is, that the world may propose standards. Yes, there will be things that use that standard, but there will also be things that don't use that standard. And if you're dominant enough, you can drive change against that standard.
I better step in before Sam says any more, others we won't have dinner.
Why me alone?
Can I ask one more time for you to raise your hands if you're in favor of the proposition? And I will repeat the proposition again in case you've fallen asleep halfway through this. The use of international precedents in IT, media, and telecom cases are crucial for the resolution of such disputes in India. If you are in favor of the motion, please raise your hand.
I think we've done a good
Yes.
job.
I have
You guys have
no clue whether we changed your mind or we didn't. Either way, I'm quite sure that if we sit down again in 5 years' time to debate this very same thing, all of us would have been wrong. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rajiv, you talked about being location agnostic, and we all talked about being geographical agnostic. So I'm reminded of John Lennon's Imagine, if you've heard it. Imagine there was no country. Imagine there was no religion too. And they say, I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. So I think, Sudeep, you also would agree with this? Maybe this is the cusp of a new world order which is coming. Maybe technology is going to drive away political differences altogether. We don't know. Thank you very much. I'd now like to call on Mr. Suren Malik, Chief Editor of ITCC, also Chief Editor of SCC, to come and say a few words, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, I know it's already late, but there's something that I do wish to add to the debate here, not in the direct way in which the questions have been put, but in another way. That is to say, how the editorial, the work that we do as a publisher, contributes to the last mile in the precedent gap. Of course, I take it that though as the question has been raised, that yes, we cannot live without precedents. And we cannot live, I agree with Shreyas, that we cannot be ignorant also. So we need that to not least the knowledge of the precedent. And our job as publishers and editors is to convert information into knowledge. And how do we do that is that first, of course, is the process of selection. And that is something that we are still finding, and we're doing it in a very drastic way. The number of precedents that we come across are many, many, and yet we are trying to select, so to say, that they are relevant to our Indian situation, anticipating also that they would arise in the future. That is one. Now, in the process, in the very minute process, that after I have selected a case, the editor makes the head note. He analyzes the case, finds out the rulings, maybe more than one, and all those rulings which he feels are relevant as a precedent, he extracts them. The question that then arises before the editor is, how do I classify it? In which heading or subheading do I put that information so that it becomes accessible? Because, as we all know, or we feel that every one of us carries an index system in our own mind in which way we look or search for information. So we as editor have to anticipate in which are the headings in which a person would look for this particular ruling. And of course, there may be a choice of many different headings. And across jurisdictions, there's also the question that the same concept may be labeled with different words. To take an example, if you're thinking of liability, it may occur to somebody in terms of compensation, somebody will think in terms of damages. So there can be a different of words for the same concept. Again, if you are coming to IT, there may, for example, if you are looking at obscenity, pornography, somebody might say indecency, somebody may say adult literature, somebody may say blasphemy in a certain jurisdiction. So the choice of the words. So we as editors have to decide that under which is the most appropriate heading under which we put that ruling. We have to be consistent so that the reader, once he gets used to know, he knows that he will find that information under that. And how do we make up for the different kinds of headings? We do that by what we call cross-references or cross-links. Those are the way where we use them to guide the reader, no matter how he starts, to reach the desired ruling. Again, please believe, every heading will have subheadings. You may start from any subheading, in fact. You may not think of the main heading. Yet, as an editor, we have to take care of that no matter which word or which concept of expression that you use, I must take you there. In addition to that, what we do is that we cross-reference things which we think will come up in the future. We want to extend the use of the precedent. I know the debate is there, but I, as an editor, would like to extend by adding such cross-links so as to give an idea to the reader that, oh, it can be used there as well. This has been the history of common law. I will start from where Raleigh and Fletcher started and to where it has reached. You can see how precedents across countries, across jurisdictions, the law has developed. So that is a possibility. And we take that possibility into mind and we add those cross-links to expand, so to say, the currency of the precedents. I'm mentioning this because then may I have the slide? Yeah. If you see the different topics, then you put the subheadings there. Now this has come only of the very few volumes that we have done. That you can see, and the other thing that I wish to draw your attention is, if you see the word in the subheadings, most of them are new, in the sense that this is a new vocabulary, the terms are new, there is a sunshine area, the concepts and the things that are coming up before the courts are entirely new. A person who's generally in practice in the civil and criminal law, if he looks at this, he may not understand half of these terms, because the concepts are very different. Most of them are technical. And therefore, what we're now trying also is to create a new heading of technical headings. Can you show that, please? This is it. All the different terms, the new kind of terms that are coming up, we do that, and then this is more or less words and phrases so that you can find the meaning of the various terms that are coming up in this new area of law. And eventually this will develop into, so to say, a dictionary of all the technical terms. To that extent, I think if precedents of other countries would have a value, because we want to understand also. One is the very, very technical meaning, which the technician will tell you. But when it comes to law, then we need a very defined meaning and understanding of every word, term, expression, even though it is technical. From that point of view, this collection or bringing the precedents of all the countries together, we feel that there is a great need for it. I'm not going into the question whether we should follow it or not. That's not the point. Question, at least we should look at it. The information should be available. I'll give you a small example where mere information helps the law. A friend came and said, this was many years back, I just finished my labor and service digest. He came to know about it. He says, I'm looking for material in appointment. So I said, you're welcome to it. And I said, you might as well see the synopsis first. He said, no, I know it. I said, no, please. I asked you. He went through the synopsis, and one of the headings that he found was legitimate expectation. He said, what's that? I said, there's another way in which you can challenge an appointment. So the mere fact of a knowledge, because there is always a situation that we don't know certain things which have come up, and the point of we don't know or what we don't know also. So therefore, sometimes the mere fact of information being put in a very systemized index system helps in the understanding and the growth of the law. And to that extent, the knowledge of precedents from all over help in the growth of the law and a better application and determination of the disputes and questions that come up before the courts. This is our belief. And it's not from the commercial point of view, please. It is the question because we as publishers feel that we have a role to play, not merely to reproduce the information in its raw, in the way in which it has come out from the court. We want to process the information and process the information as to convert it in a manner and form in which it can be used, it can help the accessor to the law, it can save time, and it is there for the future growth and expansion of the legal knowledge. And therefore, I feel that if you wish to see, then, and eventually, once we have about 10 volumes, we'll convert this entire thing into a digest. And that is the real time when we look at all the things that has been reported and put them very, very systematically so that it becomes very clear how the law has developed in the past few years. And this process is a continuing process. And the index system, so to say, is an evolutionary process. It evolves and it grows. We've done it for the Supreme Court, and we continue to do it. We continue to revise it, and we put many, many topics and subtopics together when we see that the same principle runs across several laws. The law of contract is not confined only to the Contract Act. It runs in many other, the arbitration law also has the law of contract in that content. Similarly, we are now doing it for property law, and what may come will be something that we are happy and excited about, because it runs into many different laws, the very concept of property and the different forms of property and how it is evolving in the new era of new kind of technological terms when we have different rights that are arising in different contexts. That is what I just wanted to brief you on this, that yes, behind the mere collection of the precedents and headnoting, there is a desire to put it in a very systematic manner such that we have an index system which then helps in the growth of the law. Thank you.